What is up, everybody, and welcome to FLW videos. So with the Ultra bonus coming out for the month of September and October, I thought it would be a very good time to revisit the topic of whether or not the legendary birds are worth powering up. So what I decided to do was go ahead and take a look at Generation 4, talk about the biggest threats for Zapdos, Articuno, and Moltres, and then give you the answer as to whether or not I do think that this Pokemon are going to be worth powering up. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. So the first Pokemon that we are going to be talking about is going to be Zapdos. With a max AP of 3,330, we'll go ahead and take a look at the stats. It has a stamina stat of 180, attack stat of 253, and then a defense stat of 188. So what could end up theoretically being the best counter to Zapdos from Generation 4? Is there going to be any competition? Well, honestly, there's not going to be that great of competition. The best competition is going to be Electivire. We'll go ahead and cover some of the stats, but a max AP of 2,904. When you're taking a look at the different stats, we will have a stat of 150 for the stamina, attack stat of 249, and then a defense stat of 173. So if you were to compare the two, Zapdos is actually going to win in every case. The closest case is going to be the attack stat, only a separation of 4 points. So you would say that Zapdos is going to be kind of future-proof, at least through Generation 4. But then you also have to keep in mind that it's not even the best electric type attacker in the game. That title actually belongs to Raikou. So you have to then think about it as, whether or not it's worth powering up already and not necessarily for the future in this case. It is going to be different for the other two legendary birds. I would say that Zapdos is going to be a solid option, although it's not going to necessarily be the #1 spot from that electric typing. It is, however, going to be a solid #2 spot and probably will be for a long period of time. So the next Pokemon that we are going to talk about is going to be Moltres. Now this is definitely going to be an interesting one because Moltres is going to have some competition from a Generation 4 Pokemon that is going to be a legendary. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Moltres' stats first, then we'll talk about the new Pokemon and then compare. So for Moltres, a max AP of 3,272. When we're taking a look at the stats, we have a stamina stat of 180, attack stat of 251, and then a defense stat of 184. So all in all, it is going to be a decent Pokemon, and currently is the best fire type attacker in the game. With the new recent community day adding on the Sky Attack, it could actually end up being the best option from the grass and from the bug typing from an attacking perspective, which is going to be unique and definitely going to be into our considerations as to whether or not we need to power it up. But let's go ahead and talk about the competition, and I can promise you, this is going to be the stiffest competition out of all of the three, and that is going to be Heatran. When we're talking about Heatran, a max AP of 3,521. When we're talking about the different stats, we have a stamina stat of 182, attack stat of 251, and then a defense stat of 213. So if we were to do a comparison between the two Pokemon, Heatran has a higher stamina stat. It also has a higher defensive stat. And then on the attack stat, it's going to be tied. So as long as Heatran ends up getting access to the same types of fire type movesets as Moltres, it's going to be extremely close as far as the DPS is concerned, but at the same time, Heatran is going to be able to last longer. So that to me would say that Heatran is actually going to be the #1 fire type Pokemon once Generation 4 gets here. Once again, going to push Moltres back into that #2 spot. So then you have to ask yourself the question, well, is it going to be worth powering up? And we'll definitely be covering that at the end. So let's go ahead and get into the third and final Pokemon, and that is going to be Articuno. So for Articuno, this is going to actually be a quick one because Articuno is already kind of on the fence of not even being worth powered up already, because you have a Pokemon like Jinx theoretically already outperforming it, and then when Generation 4 gets here, it gets even worse because there is a Pokemon known as Mamoswine. So let's go ahead and talk about the comparisons. So Articuno stats. You have a stamina stat of 180, an attack stat of 192, and then a defense stat of 249. When you're comparing Mamoswine to Articuno, Mamoswine has a higher stamina stat at 220, a higher attack stat at 247, and then finally has a lower defensive stat at 157. But basically Articuno has a massive defensive stat. So in this case, Articuno is going to get absolutely obliterated once Generation 4 gets here and Mamoswine gets introduced into the game. I would honestly argue that even if Mamoswine didn't have that double stab for the ice type moveset, especially like a quick move, it would still be able to outperform Articuno. That's just how advanced that attack stat is going to be. I mean, it's roughly 50 plus better than it. So all in all, covering the 3 Pokemon, we're going to go ahead and sum up whether or not you should power it up, especially considering future Pokemon from Generation 4. So for me, we'll go ahead and start with the easiest one, and that is going to be Articuno. So that is going to be a big no for me. I do not think you should try to power one up. Definitely try to get yourself a shiny, but once you get something like that, I would honestly just move on. The second topic is going to be Zapdos. This is going to be fairly interesting because you just have to ask yourself the question, what do you want to invest your rare candies into? I would honestly say that you should invest into Raikou instead of Zapdos, but Zapdos is still going to be a solid option and doesn't have a lot of competition from a Generation 4 standpoint. And the third and final Pokemon to give my recommendation on is going to be Moltres. Moltres has a ton of competition coming in from Heatran, but that doesn't mean that it isn't worth powering up. What I would recommend is that actually powering up some Sky Attack Moltres could end up being a good option because it does outperform just the regular fire type moveset Moltres when you are going against Bug and Grass. That means that it is going to be a high performer just kind of from that flying type standpoint, and something that I would personally recommend. Then when you're talking about powering up a Moltres, of course you may already have a ton of Moltreses with the double fire type moveset already powered up. So obviously I'm talking about future investments of basically Moltreses that you haven't powered up. I would honestly say that it's probably not going to be worth it if you already kind of have a full team, unless you do have a team that you want to get from the Sky Attack standpoint, because Heatran is going to dominate. But anyways, I hope you did enjoy this episode. Hopefully it did give you some guidance as to whether or not you want to power up any of these Pokemon or specifically focus on any of them throughout the entire Ultra bonus. They're definitely going to be some solid Pokemon, but at the end of the day, you do have to kind of protect yourself and use your resources wisely in the future. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and end on a question of the day. Of the legendary birds, which bird do you think is going to be the one that you should invest in the most? Go ahead and let me know in the comments section below, and I will see you next time.
Hit me like a